Greetings, YouTube. Pardon the lighting. Mandarin was here. I had someone recently make a comment on a video of mine that historically the Africans didn't do well, and I can't quite tell if that is a snipe from a white nationalist or someone who is just vastly historically ignorant. Because let's be honest, having your country invaded and subjugated by a technologically superior force will in fact set you back. And from the lens of the present, that will make you look as though you have historically didn't do well. What was it? Guns, Blood, and Disease, or something like the book. I can't remember the name of it. I think the guy's name was Diamond that wrote it. But it deals with why Europeans developed technologies and disease resistances that other people didn't, because the way diseases moved through the world and the types of lifestyle they lived. And so the Europeans were exposed to a lot of animal-based diseases in a way that other peoples weren't. So that when the Europeans moved through those new nations that they discovered, which of course weren't new, they were populated by people. I mean, there were humans on the North American continent for 15,000 years before the Europeans invaded. They had not only a great technological base with them, but they also had an arsenal of diseases to assist them silently in those endeavors. Not to mention they had certain crops that really worked well in different places of the world. So there was a multi-pronged reason that the Europeans did so well. And if you had wiped the Europeans out in the ancient past and put any other people from anywhere else on the planet in the same location and left them there long enough, they would have become the new Europeans and would have had the same advantages that the Europeans that got there to Europe first did. So it's nothing special about their skin color. White people aren't superior in any way, shape, or form. And remember that while the white Europeans were grubbing in the dirt after the fall of the Roman Empire, there were people all over the world that were excelling at technology and science and preserving things that would eventually then be readopted by the Europeans and get the Enlightenment and the Renaissance going. So the Europeans were not always on the top of the heap. And if you've looked at some of the European politics lately, they're definitely not on the top of the heap anymore. I'm not sure who is at this point. Though the Germans aren't doing horrible when it comes to human rights. There are still places in Europe that are horrible on human rights. And most of it is actually all of it is being fueled by social conservatism, which is in fact a disease. But being historically ignorant of what happened to Africa can lead one to think, oh, those Africans, they didn't do very well now, did they? Because your country didn't experience what their country did. Your country didn't have to put up with people invading them and enslaving them on a massive scale. Not saying that slavery didn't exist in Africa prior to the Europeans showed up. It did, but it didn't exist on the scale that it happened after the Europeans got there, and they weren't exporting those African peoples to other continents for the purposes of slavery. I mean, a lot of black people went from Africa to North, Central, and South America. Lots of them. Many of them didn't make that passage and just got thrown overboard. So yes, it was genocide on an incredible scale, besides being an atrocious act of slavery in and of itself. But you have to remember what the African nations survived. And prior to European invasion, many African nations had done really well. They had large, complex societies, just as like there were many Native American peoples that had done really well with large, complex, organized societies. And then the Europeans showed up and ruined that all through war and disease. War and disease is a heck of a thing to have to live through on a national scale. It can set your country back decades or centuries technologically and developmentally. And it's no fault of your own. And you should not be held responsible for that. And nor is it as an excuse for conventional modern racism. So I don't know if the person who left that comment is in fact a white nationalist or someone that just worded a statement very poorly or is just historically ignorant. But when you make a statement like the Africans didn't do well historically, you have to understand historically the reasons why. It didn't just happen out of the blue. It was an act done to them, and they survived a horrible event, the invasion and subjugation of their nations by white Europeans. I mean, remember, some of those nations did not begin to achieve some level of independence until the 20th century, and that's terrifying. So I think we should, take that into consideration when making statements like that. Of course, if the person is a white nationalist and just trying to be subtle, they're never good at subtle, then you can just go fuck right off. I don't need you on my channel. But if you're hysterically ignorant, you may want to do a little research as to why Africa didn't do well historically. Because again, having one's nation invaded and subjugated will in fact really, really ruin your history.